Welcome to our latest edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. I'm Jonathan Hudson, and in today's edition, we'll focus on the latest developments, particularly here in Israel, but with a broad spectrum to all developments in the Middle East, including a visit just yesterday by CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla yet again to the region, particularly also here to Israel, where he received the operational plans for a potential all-out escalation vis-a-vis the Iranian proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. And to discuss that and more, let's now turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, who formerly served as a senior director of the NSC in Washington for Lebanon, for Syria, for Iraq, for Iran, as well as a U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, among a long list of other senior officials. Now, of course, also the founding director of the American Center for Levant Studies. It's good to see you, Joel. I'd like to get your 2 cents on the latest visit by the top field commander of CENTCOM. What are we to expect of the collaboration and interoperability between the two nations in a time that may indeed develop into a full-scale conflagration?
Well, of course, I don't have any direct inside information on the state of CENTCOM planning and so on, which General Kurilla is managing. But I will say this, and General Mark Emmett, who's with us today, who also was a longtime CENTCOM expert and officer, so he's familiar with all of this as well. I think what we have seen since October 7th, especially in the theater of the Levant, including Israel, including Hezbollah, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, is without having any particular inside information about it, you can detect, if you've had CENTCOM experience, the role of CENTCOM in enabling and providing intelligence context and providing other kinds of support, whether that's in delivering arms resupplies and so on, but just overall logistical and intelligence support to Israel's effort to mount a defense and let's say a forward-leaning defense in the north against the IRGC proxy network. I think that's been extraordinarily successful. I would have to say General Kurilla and his team. I think that you have to get, again, without having any specific inside information, I don't think the defeat of the Iranian attack, the direct attack on the night of April 13th, 14th, and the preemptive strike against Hezbollah launch sites more recently, I think those indicate those wouldn't have happened. I think without a robust CENTCOM assistance project, and that's something I think that's down to General Kurilla's leadership. So I think one of the things that I would look for is I find it very interesting that in recent days there's been a bit of a revisiting of the question of exactly how strong is Hezbollah, exactly to what degree. There are now analyses. I know that the IDF has been looking at this. A lot of the security think tank and academic experts in Israel have been looking at the question of given the Iranian attacks, direct attacks, given what happened just recently with Hezbollah's attempted attacks that were preempted, what is the degree of the threat that Hezbollah poses, and to maybe revise the assessment of that threat. And I think probably, if I would guess that General Kurilla, part of his being there is to reassess the level of threat from the north and exactly what kind of operations are feasible, possible, and what kind of. That's something that CENTCOM is built to illuminate.
Absolutely. Well, let's turn elsewhere in Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Brigadier General Mark Emmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs, as well as a planner at CENTCOM. It's great to see you, General. I'd like to hear your take on this meeting. Obviously, Central Command is the umbrella military contingent of the United States military that oversees operations together with allies, partners throughout the region, and is very much in charge, as Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has mentioned, in everything to do with the current war being waged on multiple fronts. What are we to take from this latest meeting, which is not the first and not the last, if I may also add, since he has been here already for at least 8 to 9 times in the past year?
Oh, I think you can make the analogy of Eisenhower visiting the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff, during World War II before they actually kick off the coalition operations. This is an opportunity to stuff Mike Kurilla's airplane full of planners, both intelligence planners and J5 operational planners, J3 operational planners as well. They're probably comparing notes. They're probably looking for gaps in each other's planning, trying to figure out what each other need, because I don't think it's anymore two separate organizations, but this in many ways is a coalition that is working together with Israel and the United States to make sure that their plans are harmonized.
Thank you, General Kimmett. Let's now turn elsewhere here in Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Relik Shafir, formerly an Israeli Air Force commander, a fighter pilot, and a long list of other positions. It's good to see you, General. Several hours after General Kurilla held his meeting with his Israeli counterpart, IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, a quite large in scale attack was reported on in Syria against multiple targets, targets belonging not only to the Syrian military, but also to Iran, Hezbollah, and of course, quite a major research facility belonging to the Syrian armed forces. The IDF spokesperson's unit did not confirm or deny its alleged involvement in response to our request for comment. Nonetheless, it seems like the Damascus regime is quite convinced that Israel was behind this attack that claimed the lives to this moment in time of at least 25 different individuals, including members of Hezbollah, including members of various proxies that are serving the RGC Quds Force.
Yes, this is an interesting development. I'm not absolutely sure that it has anything to do with the visit, but let's suppose that it may have been okayed by CENTCOM in that Syria so far, the Israeli forces were hitting convoys of Iranian munitions that were sent via Syria, landing in Syria, or by land, and traveling into Lebanon, and watching carefully not to be too aggressive towards the Syrians themselves. That coupled with the fact that Hezbollah operatives were chased down, we're talking about over 400 Hezbollah commanders and senior operators that were taken out in Lebanon. That had probably led to Hezbollah moving their staff and moving some of their commanders into Syria. So I would guess that Israel had decided to step up the attacks on Iranian proxies. Iranians and Iranian proxies were the only, I would say, reason to back off a little is what are the Russians going to do in case the attacks become too close to where the Russians are. And let me remind you that the Russians have deployed their modern S-400 anti-aircraft missiles into Syria and are manned by Russians, which means that the Syrians can't use them. They have to use older types. So I would think that this is a step up of Israel against Iran to put pressure on Iran and Hezbollah to refrain or to move into some kind of an agreement. Otherwise, we would go into a conflict in southern Lebanon, which will probably include not just airstrikes, but also ground movement. and maybe we'll talk later on how the preemptive strike actually thwarted the Hezbollah attack a couple of weeks ago.
Absolutely. Well, Colonel Rayburn, I'd like to actually shift gears first to Jordan, where there was, of course, a terrorist attack by a Jordanian truck driver who was able to conceal a weapon, a firearm, into the Israeli side of the border. Then he continued by opening fire towards 3 Israeli civilians. Unfortunately, all were pronounced dead upon the medics' arrivals. But when we're looking at this individual, who was also subsequently eliminated by local forces, he is a member of one of the southern Bedouin tribes rather than the large Palestinian population of Jordan. Is this a certain indication to the monarchy losing control over those tribes that are defined as loyal to the king beyond any of the other populations within Lebanon's relatively small demography?
Well, that's certainly something that whatever terror network is actually behind the attack. That's certainly a perception that they would like to create. Is that the Jordanian tribes are turning against the kingdom and the kingdom's national security priorities and so on. I mean, it's sort of like Bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed recruiting a large number of Saudis to attack New York in 9/11. That was done for a political reason. Now, I think also, I mean, in the Jordanian tribes, there are always sort of stray extremists who can wind up playing a role. I don't think that's unusual, and I don't think actually that there's a danger of a break between those tribes and the monarchy. But certainly, this guy will have been selected probably to try to create that perception.
Indeed. He was, of course, also a member of the special police forces in the past, something that was unveiled by the internal ministry in Jordan. But nonetheless, following this attack, we saw protests by members as well as supporters of the Ihwan, the Muslim Brotherhood. And therefore, when we're talking about the collaboration between the Muslim Brotherhood, which of course the Islamist Hamas is an offshoot of in the Gaza Strip and in the so-called West Bank, Jordan Valley, Judea, and Samaria. Some of those organizations affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan have been quite active in facilitating the transit of weaponry, funds, and other illicit materials through Jordan into the so-called West Bank in support of Israel's adversaries. And for that purpose, I'd like to ask you, General Kimmett, when we're talking particularly about those activities, they do so in collaboration, of course, with the RGC Quds Force, but also with the Fatimiyun brigades, with the Zainabiyun brigades in Syria, as well as with Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq. Is this a broad scheme of things that the Iranians are trying to somehow weaken the regime in Amman?
Well, the last time I was in Amman, there was no doubt that there was concern among the elite that there are assaults trying to bring down the regime. Now, how effectively they've been, I think all of us understand the GID in Jordan is quite an organization. They work quietly. You don't read a lot about this in the newspapers, but the fact remains is that Jordan has been under siege in many ways since 1970 in the Black September movement. I don't know if this is going to be significantly different. It's clearly a large Sunni class inside of Jordan now that's not happy with what's going on. But I do agree with you that this is probably the most significant assault on the Jordanian monarchy that we've seen probably in a couple of decades. But they seem to have it under control at this moment.
Indeed. General Shafir, I'd like to ask you particularly, since General Kimmett mentioned Black September in the 1970s. At the time, of course, the Fadaiyun were fighting against the monarchy and received also the backing of the Syrian regime at the time. The commander of the Syrian Air Force at the time, Hafez al-Assad, the father of the current dictator in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, he was the commander of the Air Force who was ordered to launch attacks against the Jordanian army in support of the PLO, and he refused. The reason for the refusal, according to what he stated back then, was for fear that Israel would shoot Syrian aircraft out of the sky in support of Jordan. That is something, of course, that Israel would probably do again in the event that the monarchy is under threat for strategic reasons. One of them, Jordan, of course, is a depth of field, a strategic depth of field for the state of Israel, and also has a peace treaty with Israel beyond all of the rhetoric going back and forth between Amman and Jerusalem. What are we to expect from this relationship at a time when the Iranians are seemingly trying to apply pressure against the monarchy?
Well, let's just recall a little bit on Black September when the PLO hijacked, I think it was about six airplanes, passenger airplanes, and eventually blew them up in North Jordan. And King Hussein had started an onslaught on the PLO supposedly independent warriors there, and the Syrians were called in to help. I think the Jordanians beat up on the Syrians pretty badly. Israeli Mirage airplanes were loitering the sky near the border, and therefore Hafez al-Assad decided not to obey the commands of the chief of staff at the time. But going back today, it's a different story. There's peace, though cold peace, but still peace between Israel and Jordan, but very warm relations between the military echelons, both in Israel and Jordan, and cooperating. And the Jordanian military is trying very hard to stop smuggling through the border, although this border is pretty easy to go through, which is unfortunate at this time. I think Israel will not allow any change in the Jordanian kingdom to take place. And I think the Jordanian military, which is led by Bedouins in general, will not allow the Palestinians to take over. And so I think Israel will stand by Jordan, even at the cost of some demonstrations in Jordan, to make sure that it stays a reliable ally as it has shown itself, especially in April of this year.
Absolutely. Well, let's shift gears to Egypt, where we're seeing it trying to bolster its various activities in Somalia as well as in Sudan, particularly also as a counterbalance to the Ethiopian efforts to establish a port in the Red Sea via Somaliland and other, of course, challenges currently within the domestic sphere of Sudan, where we're seeing also Iran bolstering its influence quite rapidly with the transfer of quite the substantive amount of munitions that has shifted the balance of power in support of Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his government there, his military government, if I may dub it that. But Colonel Rayburn, when we're looking at that area, it seems like there are not enough assets, particularly European, no American assets whatsoever. They have shifted into different locations in a broader posture, but the Europeans have withdrawn a number of their defensive assets in recent weeks. Is that something that will further bolster potentially activities by malign actors such as the Iranians, such as their surrogate in Yemen, namely Ansar Allah, and potentially new allies within the Horn of Africa?
Well, sure. Everywhere you see the U.S. and let's say NATO allies recoiling, you see others filling that vacuum. The Iranians want to be active across not just the Horn of Africa, but other regions of Africa. The Chinese have been there for quite some time and have been wanting to expand that foothold. Africa is exactly the kind of place that the Chinese value because it's resource rich. It's rich in the kind of resources that the Chinese themselves don't have. So they want to secure, and to the extent that the Western powers will try, they'll move into the vacuum. I think, brother, you started this question by mentioning Egypt and strategic developments and the posture of Egypt, but I think something that will affect the Horn of Africa as well as North Africa is that there's this growing, I think, resolution of differences between Egypt and Turkey, which is probably all to the good and can maybe open up space for resolving the conflicts in Libya and Sudan and so on, and that's going to have an impact in the Horn of Africa as well. If Cairo and Ankara are growing more and more into strategic alignment, then I think that would give some room for a lot of these local conflicts to be resolved, and then there will be less instability, for example, the Iranian regime to exploit. But we'll have to see. That's something that's not going to happen by itself, just naturally, in a way that will be in alignment with U.S. and European interests, unless the U.S. and Europeans are involved in it and helping to channel it in a positive direction.
Indeed. General Kemet, your take on this, theater?
No, I agree with Joel. I think the big player that we recognize, but we don't really contest, is China. The fact is, these countries love China coming in because China not only provides significant commercial interest, but also does not take a position on the internal affairs of that particular country. So, of course, these countries would like to have China come in with a significant amount of cash on hand. Yes, there's a bit of asset stripping that is done by China, but by and large, they leave the governments alone to do what they need to do and they want to do. So China's the ideal partner, and that's who we're losing ground to in a significant amount of places. You can't swing a dead cat in that region without hitting a couple of Chinese businessmen.
Indeed. Well, that's a interesting analogy, but or metaphor. General Shafil, we don't have very much time left, but I'd like to ask you, since the Houthis in Yemen, Ansar Allah namely, which have been working at behest of the Iranians for quite some time now, have been quite deliberate in attacks against Greek shipping. And as we are aware, Greece has provided, when the United States made the decision at the time to withdraw Patriot missiles, Greece was the one to step in. Is this a signal, basically, by this Iranian proxy and Iran proper, that whoever comes to the aid of the moderate camp in the region will be targeted in the event of a full-scale war, but also in low-intensity war, as we're currently witnessing in the Red Sea and the adjacent waterways?
I think this has to be coupled with the fact that there are many, many ships that sail under the Greek flag. This is one of Greece's strengths in providing not naval but marine type shipping all over. So I'm not absolutely sure that this is the case, but obviously Greece and Turkey are always at odds. And perhaps the Houthis are trying to warm up towards the Turks, who've grown very belligerent towards Israel, and are trying to create a pact with the Egyptians, which may be very helpful in the Horn of Africa, but might be working against us. And so the Greeks, who are very pro-Israelis, this may strike the Houthis as a good opportunity to create a rift and score a double score in this particular issue.
Indeed. Well, we have less than a minute and a half for all of you, but nonetheless, in one sentence, what should we focus on for the next week ahead? Colonel Rayburn, we'll start with you.
Here, everything is on the U.S. election. This is sort of tomorrow night. There's a debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. The United States is not looking at internally, not looking at anything else but that. And I think a lot of our allies around the world are kind of in the same mode.
General Kimmett?
Yeah, I agree with Joel. I think it'll be very interesting to listen to what Kamala Harris and Donald Trump say in the way of foreign policy in general and regional issues in particular. Up to this point, Harris has offered nothing but platitudes and obvious, we'd like to have a ceasefire, but we're going to defend Israel, and I abhor the deaths of young children. Well, those are just platitudes. That's not policy. Hopefully that dynamic between those two candidates will at least cause some sort of dialectic so that we get an idea of where these two are going to go with regional issues that we've been talking about today.
General Shafir?
I think the elections are overshadowing the ability to reach any agreement in Gaza to alleviate the intensity of the conflict in Lebanon. And we're in a kind of a limbo that will hold maybe until November 5th, after which it's a world of opportunities, as one may call. So I expect a limbo to continue until that time.
Indeed. Well, with that, I'd like to thank General Shafir, General Kimmett, and Colonel Rayburn for all of your insights. I'd like also to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.